At the start, when we were introduced to Aizen, he seemed like the most logical, kindest captain around, especially when you compare him to the other goons he was surrounded by. A sly, funny-looking snake, a psychotic madman with a weird cut, a creepy clown-looking guy, this drunk, pervy old man, some guy who coughs out his lungs regularly. I'm sure you get the point. He seemed like one of the only sensible ones around. Compared to everyone around, you could say he looked like some Gote nerd. Out of everyone, Aizen looked exactly like the kind of scrub who would get murked off screen and killed. What made things so great was that, spoilers aside, I don't think anyone would have thought of this dweeb to be the Machiavellian master of machinations, the main antagonist of the series. While many fans may have gotten Aizen spoiled, I did myself. Gin Ichimaru played the red herring well in how we all thought he was the villainous one. To summarize Aizen's story at the start, he was killed off, but later, we would come to find through the famous words that it was all a part of Aizen's plan. This was all a ruse, so he could fake his death and eventually cripple the Soul Society by murdering Central 46, the governing authority of the Soul Society. This allowed him to gain full power by mimicking Central 46. One word can be used to describe it all: defecation. I mean defection. Well, he pretty much shat all over the Gote, so that works as well. We would see the defection of Sosuke Aizen, the most capable Soul Reaper among the Gote, alongside two Gote captains. The fallen god will ascend to new heights, ascend to the skies to make his escape, which was ironic. One would think he would fall down to the depths of the underworld when descending into betrayal. That is, unless you truly believe he is a fallen god, or rather an ascended one. Aizen would take over Hueco Mundo with ease. The sands of Hueco Mundo had seen much bloodshed. It had paid witness to many battles, but this takeover seemed almost effortless. Veni Vidi Vici would have been the right words to describe Aizen's conquest. He came, he saw, he conquered. So much so that the incredibly powerful king of Hueco Mundo would concede without much of a fight, with him and his ranks abiding to Aizen's will. Aizen would seek to start a war with his newly acquired ranks of Arrancar. Aizen would bless the Hollows with his ever-expanding perspective of advancement, in turn giving them more strength. Or like a poison, Aizen had spread his blasphemous views on evolution by helping the Hollows evolve, just like Aizen did himself. Aizen would task one of his Arrancars, Ulquiorra, to kidnap Orihime, in turn luring Ichigo and the gang. Through this, we would see the growth and evolution of countless characters. Ichigo made tremendous leaps of improvement, just like his friends. Some discovered their innate powers, some developed deeper bonds, some had finally tied up tragic loose ends, made peace with their past, and many obtained valuable experiences. With the battles of the fake Karakura Town arc, it would eventually lead to Aizen making a move against everyone there. Using his Kyoka Suigetsu, he would demolish the Gote, making a complete utter mockery of them. He destroyed top-class killers and made it look easy, and then went on to extinguish the flames of the big boss man himself, Yama, causing him to lose an arm. Nothing could stop this man, not even death, as Aizen's conquest would continue even after getting killed via the fangs of the snake Gin Ichimaru. Aizen would evolve and soar to even higher heights through the Hogyoku. No one was left to even contend with Aizen, save the hero Ichigo Kurosaki, the hero that Aizen had a big part in creating, alongside the sneaky mentor, the shady man of 1,000 plans, Kisuke Urahara. After Isshin would buy some time for Ichigo to train in the Dangai, the fated battle would finally be upon us. We would see the battle of two ever-evolving specimens. Aizen would continue to transform, and so would Ichigo. Through the hero's final Getsuga Tensho, alongside his mentor's sneaky ceiling Kido, Aizen would finally be defeated. I think Aizen's defeat really was beautiful. We learned the most about the mysterious Aizen at this very moment. In Aizen's defeat, there were some similarities to Kaname Tozen's loss. After holofying and gaining his sight, Tozen stopped using his perceptive spiritual abilities that made him so great. He was blinded by his newfound power, and you can say the same with Aizen. After gaining the Hogyoku and reaching the closest thing we've seen to immortality, his ever-scheming and 10 steps ahead of you nature was no longer needed. As a result, he allowed for Ichigo to gain incredible strength in the Dangai and was sealed by Kisuke, someone who did not have the luxury of the Hogyoku and still had to rely on his intellect. So you can say Aizen's defeat was caused by him being blinded by his own power, just like his trusty subordinate. However, that is just one way to look at things. At the end of this battle, after Ichigo clashed souls with Aizen, he would come to understand Aizen more so than anyone else. Through the songs sung through their blades, Ichigo will come to understand loneliness, isolation. He'd come to understand how a being with so much intellect and power could never fit in anywhere. Aizen was the closest thing to perfection, which is ironically what made things volatile to his psyche. The fact that he was perfect and had no rivals. There was no one on his level, and that brought upon a sense of loneliness inside him, a sense of longing for an equal. Aizen was the puppet master, dictating the pace of all Bleach events. He would wipe out the Gote without even breaking a sweat. He made it look incredibly easy. No wonder he was lonely and sought an equal, if he could do that to top class Shinigami. How boring will life be if you could do absolutely anything you wanted? If everything you sought for happened? Where is the excitement in life without any challenges? This void must have been amplified by the Hogyoku. After gaining this gem of an artifact, Aizen must have felt that everything he ever wanted would be his. With the Hogyoku, he even escaped death. If death could not stop him, then what will? Where is the thrill in life if everything you want can be yours without much struggle? Thus was the dilemma Sasuke Aizen likely fought with. That is where Ichigo enters, an anomaly, a being carrying all the races in a single vessel. If this being was put through trial after trial and slowly unlocked that hidden potential of his, maybe, just maybe, he can serve as a worthy adversary to Sasuke Aizen. Maybe he can be a rival to him. Now, for someone as unbeatable as Aizen, it makes sense how deep down he longed for someone to be on his level, someone to push him further, to limits he never knew were possible, as only so much progress can be gained on your own without someone pushing you. But with a rival, perhaps they can battle to their heart's content. With a rival, maybe he'll have someone to inspire him to be better. With a rival, perhaps the world wouldn't be so empty. Maybe, just maybe, with a rival, someone may finally come to understand Sasuke Aizen, to see what he does, to feel what he does, to accompany him on this never-ending path of growth and evolution. Maybe, a rival would be no different from a friend to a being like Sasuke Aizen. So did he indirectly train Ichigo to be an absolute weapon for this very reason, so that he too can experience what it means to have an equal, so that he can feel that never-ending thrill of having someone to rival him, so that they can grow together. Maybe, perhaps he had finally found someone with as much conviction to change the world as he did in Ichigo Kurosaki. It's lonely at the top is an understatement for the one known as Sasuke Aizen. Maybe this whole time, he schemed just so someone can meet him at the zenith he had reached so long ago. In Aizen's defeat, we were better able to understand his goals. Throughout his schemes, we knew he sought to evolve and destroy the boundaries between Hollows and Shinigami, resulting in a more powerful and advanced being. But right before his defeat, he would mention the Rio, the Soul King, and how he refused to be ruled by that thing. As time went on, we would find out that Aizen's plan was to march into the Soul King's palace and dethrone the Soul King so he can rule the world for himself. And finally, as discussed earlier, his goals perhaps had the betterment of Ichigo in mind, the ascendance of the being who Aizen had truly hoped would become his equal. To sum it up, at the end of Aizen's battle, we found out that deep down he longed for someone to be equivalent to him, or at least similar, and not even the internal desires of the most conniving and manipulative of characters could be hidden from the Hogyoku, the god of death who sought to transcend all those around him. Deep down, just wanted to have an equal. Deep down, he wanted someone to transcend to his level, despite being the closest thing to perfection. His supposed perfection itself was his downfall in this battle. This was the best thing to happen to Aizen. It was his greatest test, his greatest defeat, and for someone as smart as him, it undoubtedly had an impact on his being, his ideas, and his overall outlook. With a supposed eternity to contemplate on what happened in the depths of Mukin, Aizen would come out stronger and better beyond question. When all the protectors of the Soul Society have passed on, it would be Aizen deep in Mukin, plotting and advancing in his own way. but we wouldn't have to wait that long to see him again. In flashbacks, we see Aizen doing exactly what you expect him to do. We do not have a backstory, but instead we witness the machinations and schemes of the man who was so far ahead of everyone else. We see him experimenting on his fellow Goten members through holification. In the 1000-Year Blood War, we also see Aizen running an experiment with White through his fated encounter with Isshin and Misaki, thus resulting in the being known as Ichigo Kurosaki, laying the framework for the future events in Bleach. In the 1000-Year Blood War, it would be Aizen who would perhaps save Ichigo from being imprisoned, held captive by Yuha, and slowly transformed into a Quincy war machine. As Yuha would say, it was Aizen who messed with his perception of time, forcing Yuha to withdraw. To fight a monster, you must consult with your very own. To kill a demon, you must recruit the ones hidden underground. Thus is the path that Shunsui took as he decided to unleash Aizen back onto the realms. The same menace who was imprisoned for countless lifetimes was set free to wreak havoc on the Quincy, as the desperate Shinigami had no choice. It was here that Aizen would decimate the Soul King's remnants, and even go on to engage with Yuha, two of Bleach's greatest villains going at it, while introducing us to the coolest Hado ever, Hado number 99, Goryu Tenmetsu. We were also given this panel in the fight, which is reminiscent of the Creation of Adam or Creation of Man painting by Michelangelo, featuring the first man and god. Whereas here we have the transcendent Aizen, the fallen god of death, against the Quincy King, the god amongst the Quincy, supposed progeny of the Soul King. This amazing confrontation would eventually lead to a showdown of monumental proportions, Aizen teaming up with Ichigo to face Yuha. These events may just be one of the greatest moments in all of Bleach, with all the realms praying for their hero, Ichigo, to come out victorious, with the realms having a conflicted sense of relief now that the treacherous Aizen is fighting on their side once again. With all the realms at stake, the world's greatest hero, the world's greatest villain, fight together against the most terrifying and destructive force the realms have witnessed since its creation. And what a triumphant moment it was, the main villain of Bleach teaming up with the hero, the man he pretty much raised in a way, facing off against an unparalleled threat, a villain that transcends everything we have seen. But even these two would not be enough to take out the pride of the Quincy, the Emperor cloaked within the shadows, the monstrosity known as Yhwach. As mentioned in the Yuha video, a joint effort would be needed to have a chance to beat Yuha. And here, Aizen would use his powers as a distraction to once again deceive Yuha. Some refer to this moment as the hero and villain teaming up to combat the greater evil, but as this series should come to show, it is much deeper than that, and oftentimes no side can escape the label that is evil and even good. We even had this moment earlier in the fight, where Aizen would speak to Ichigo, but it would get interrupted, so we never had a conversation with them. What was Aizen going to say to Ichigo in this moment? He stopped mid-fight against the strongest being they have ever seen to say something, so it must have been important. After the 1000-Year Blood War events, it would not be Ichigo or any of his closest allies that would narrate the end. No, it would be Sosuke Aizen from the depths of Muken, who would state why Yuha's philosophy and world was wrong in his eyes. A world devoid of fear, a world without the fear of death would result in a world where humanity's main obstacles are taken away. Without these obstacles, the triumphs of accomplishments and growth will also be taken away. Without death, it would ultimately lead to the degeneration of all beings because they no longer have the greatest motivator in death to keep pushing them forward. The world will become placid, with its residents lacking the courage and hope that is tied to death, fear, and conquering your fears. Ironically, it was Aizen mentioning all of this, the one who escaped death through the Hogyoku, and so he was the best person to speak on this topic because he speaks from experience. Through his contemplation in Muken, he must have understood that his conquest of perfection had its own flaws. He must have evaluated over his immortality and found some disadvantages to it, with the lack of courage and drive being one of them, since he no longer has death pushing him forward. Without death at the back of his mind, he lost his greatest force of improvement and evolution. In short, where Yuha sought a world of stagnation, a world devoid of fear, Aizen sought a world of evolution, with fear being a necessity for that world. Other than not wanting to be subjugated by another, That was another reason why Aizen could not follow Yuha. Aizen is a fitting person to be the narrator, one of the select few who can be given the honor to do so, as he had closely watched Ichigo and his exploits. I think Aizen would be a fitting narrator to the whole series, telling the stories of the world while in the depths of Mukin. He'd make for a legendary one, as someone who had schemed to change the world to sculpt it to his liking, only to see someone who he had a hand in creating do it himself. The only other person who'd be a fitting narrator would be the other mysterious man who is running Bleach away from the limelight, the one who I have mentioned so many times in relation to Aizen. With Aizen's story summarized, I wanted to go through and answer the questions of what exactly did Aizen plan before I go into the light novels. Why is Aizen often given the title of Master Schemer and Manipulator? Let's go back and find out. We can start by turning back the pendulum. In the past, he orchestrated the holification of the Gotei, the characters now known as the Vizards. Before that, he would scheme to create his half of the Hogyoku, thus coming in contact with a young Rangiku and catching the elusive eyes of Gin Ichimaru. Aizen was behind Ichigo's greatest ally in white. It was Aizen who cultivated this being and set the motion in progress to link it to Ichigo. Aizen would perhaps for the first time come in contact with something that was not a part of his plan, and it would change his life and everyone else's. You can see the intrigue and wonder on his face in this very panel. Thus, Aizen played a vital role in Ichigo's conception, witnessing White melding together with Masaki while saving Isshin, which in turn would lead to Ichigo. Now, back to the start of Bleach. In the beginning, Aizen would wipe out Central 46 and control the Soul Society from the shadows. From there, he would send Rukia, the wielder of Urahara's Hogyoku, to the Soul Society. Rukia would be drawn to Ichigo, and no wonder, Ichigo was a relative to Rukia's mentor, Kain Shiba, and he looked just like him. Ichigo had latent spiritual powers just waiting to be unlocked, and it was Rukia who would be the catalyst to that. She would ignite the engine and finally start the journey of the world's greatest hero. Aizen would send over Fishbone D, a hollow to attack Ichigo's family to unlock Ichigo's powers, and he correctly predicted this as Rukia would transfer her powers to Ichigo. Later, when Uryu placed Hollow Bait, it attracted a Menos Grande. This of course had Uryu perplexed, and so perhaps it was Aizen who arranged this to further advance Ichigo's prowess. Aizen would call for Rukia to be punished by the Soul Society through the Central 46, which again were all slain, thus allowing him to retrieve Urahara's Hogyoku and combine it with his own. This in turn brought Ichigo to the Soul Society, but before that, he was confronted by Renji and Byakuya. Having these two sent over ensured that they would have a meeting again in the future. That said, if the Hogyoku was the goal, I am sure he could have retrieved it with ease far earlier. The argument against this was that he needed the Sokyoku to get the Hogyoku from Rukia, but instead he found a different way once he faked his death and gained access to hidden documents and technology within the Soul Society. However, if you assume that he could have found a way to get it earlier, it was like Aizen wanted to use all of these events to bring out the latent potential of Ichigo as well as those around him. When Ichigo arrived to the Soul Society arc, he was welcomed by the trusty old happy snake Gin, who of course colluded with Aizen until his very last breaths. Gin would dispose of Ichigo despite not following his orders, but Ichigo would survive, and as a result, the bloodthirsty Kenpachi would be on his trail to hunt Ichigo down. In a sense, Gin's actions are what led Kenpachi onto Ichigo's trail after he found out that he survived the captain's attack. Perhaps this was planned by Aizen as well. Despite Ichigo's insane potential, there were some captains that Ichigo could not have beaten, and Kenpachi was perhaps the only one he could have beaten. He did not have the bad luck of Chad to be stuck with someone who would defeat him with ease. From there, he would defect and send Ulquiorra after Orihime, again leading for Ichigo to infiltrate another world and save a friend, this time in Hueco Mundo. Ichigo would then face off not once but twice against Ulquiorra, with Ulquiorra going as far as killing him the first time. He would face off against Grimmjow to strengthen his holification abilities, and then finally fight against the full power Ulquiorra and go full Vasto Lorde. So far, all of Aizen's exploits have resulted in Ichigo getting stronger. On top of that, you can argue most important characters did get stronger and better, as without Aizen's insurrection, without the battles with the Hollows, the Shinigami would have been slaughtered by the ever-looming Quincy threat, which would manifest in the Thousand-Year Blood War. As Aizen mentions here, all your battles took place here in the palm of my hands. Up till this moment, everything was carefully calculated by Aizen to bring out Ichigo's potential and make him the man he is today. Of course, there are others who had a similar part to play, mainly one man, which I've been constantly mentioning, but do not worry, he'll be the next character I'll cover in my Can't Fear Your Own World series. Aizen would also betray Harribel in the fake Karakura Town battle. The fact that he betrayed his own subordinates and the rest of the Arrancars may have very well saved their lives. After some time, the Hollows seemed to be on better terms with the Soul Reapers, and I believe the betrayal was needed for that. They now have common grounds in being betrayed, as well as a common enemy in Aizen. But if Harribel and the Hollows were never betrayed, and the enemy was outright defeated, it may have caused some problems between the two sides. So perhaps this was thought through by Aizen as well, or it wasn't, who knows. Before Aizen fought Ichigo, he would go on to destroy the Kototsu, the cleaner in the Dangai, which is what allowed Ichigo to train for an increasingly long time, giving us the Dangai Ichigo form which fans like to label. Again, giving Ichigo that time to train may have been the very reason for this. Or it could have just been the rebellious nature of Aizen, more of which I'll talk about later. After his fight with Ichigo, we would see the disappearance of Aizen for quite some time until the Thousand-Year Blood War. The next scheme of his would be when he confronted Yuha in Mukin. As mentioned earlier, he would mess with Yuha's perception of time, thus preventing Yuha from taking Ichigo with him. The rest seemed like Aizen was living in spontaneity as he was released from prison to combat the Quincy threat. For once, it was as if Aizen was not the puppet master and was set to roam free without constraints, without having to play the role of the planner. Perhaps Aizen's scheming and interest in holification were precautions for this ever-looming Quincy threat.